20 years ago, a storm ripped through New Orleans and left the city underwater. But the real flood wasn't just water, it was government failure, legal betrayal, and the systemic neglect of Black lives. Today, we're not just remembering Hurricane Katrina, we're putting the law itself on trial. In honor of my fellow Louisianians and all of those affected, then and now, by Hurricane Katrina. This one is for you. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Overruled. It's me, Jay, and this episode, we're digging into the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which is so hard to even fathom, being someone that lived through it as a child. Here's the thing. Most people think Katrina was just a natural disaster, a hurricane that overwhelmed a city. But that's only half of the story. The truth is, Katrina revealed how our legal system can collapse just as fast as levees. And when that happens, it's the most vulnerable who are left to drown. In this episode, we're breaking down the failures of FEMA, the discrimination baked into rebuilding programs, the lawsuits that survivors fought and lost, and the dangerous legal precedents Katrina left behind. Spoiler alert, 20 years later, the same loopholes are waiting for the next major storm. So, let's get into it. Kicking things off with issues on the docket. Let's go back to the morning of August 29th, 2005. Hurricane Katrina roared into the Gulf Coast as a Category 3 storm. Winds up to 125 miles per hour. Rain pounding. Storm surge rapidly rising. But what people remember most isn't just the hurricane. It's the aftermath. What came after that hurricane? What drowned New Orleans wasn't just water at all. It was a series of failures. Failure by the systems designed to protect people in these circumstances. The levees, built and maintained by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, collapsed in more than 50 places. The city became a bowl filling with water, literally. 80% of New Orleans underwater. More than 1,800 lives lost. Over 1 million people displaced. And the truth is, Katrina may have been a natural disaster, but the aftermath of that natural disaster was entirely man-made. Enter FEMA into the chat. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, the cavalry that never showed. Families packed into the Superdome and the Convention Center waited days in suffocating heat for food, water, and medical aid. Convoys of supplies were literally turned away. A bipartisan congressional investigation later branded FEMA's performance, quote, a failure of initiative. The report put it bluntly. The preparation for and response to Hurricane Katrina should disturb all Americans. Our government failed at all levels, and we must learn from this tragedy. And the human toll was immediate. As one evacuee testified before Congress, quote, "We were treated like refugees in our own country. We had no water, no medicine, and no hope. Just the stench of death all around us." When survivors tried to hold FEMA accountable, courts slammed the door shut. Thanks to the Federal Tort Claims Act's discretionary function exception, FEMA couldn't be sued for negligence in how it handled the response. Translation: you can lose your house, your community, and even your loved ones. And the law will still tell you the government owes you nothing and to kick rocks.
Yeah, double homicide.
Then came the so-called recovery. Billions of federal dollars funneled through the Road Home program, supposedly to help families rebuild. But the formula for aid was based on a home's pre-storm property value, not the actual cost of repairs. And you can guess where this goes. Homes in Black neighborhoods were historically undervalued. So Black families received smaller grants than white families with the same level of damage if they received funding at all. Civil rights groups sued HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, in 2008. They argued the formula baked in discrimination, which is a fact. One displaced homeowner told reporters at the time, quote, "They told me the value of my home was worth less, so I deserved less. But my walls were just as gone as everyone else's." Years later, HUD settled and promised changes. But for thousands of families, it was too late. They'd already been priced out of coming home. What was marketed as rebuilding was really selective rebuilding at a much higher cost. Now, we can't talk about Katrina without talking about the levees. Survivors brought the Katrina Canal Breaches Litigation against the Army Corps of Engineers. The argument here for this case was simple. Your negligence in designing and maintaining these levees caused catastrophic flooding. A federal district judge agreed, finding the Corps liable. Now, for a brief, very brief moment, it looked like survivors might actually see justice. But then came the Flood Control Act of, wait for it, 1928. This nearly century-old law gives the federal government broad immunity from liability for flood control projects. In 2012, the Fifth Circuit overturned the ruling, and the Supreme Court let it stand based off of this law from 1928. So even when negligence was proven beyond a reasonable doubt, even when the Corps itself said, "Oh yeah, we have to cop to this," and they admitted its levee design was flawed, the law said, "Sorry, you can't collect on that, citizen." Before Katrina, New Orleans was about 2/3 Black. After Katrina, tens of thousands of Black residents never returned. Why? Because FEMA prioritized homeowners over renters, and renters were disproportionately Black. Because the road home payouts I mentioned earlier shortchanged Black neighborhoods. Because developers swooped in, buying up land cheap, and reshaping neighborhoods into something unrecognizable, aka gentrifying. And let's not ignore the criminalization. Survivors desperate for food were labeled looters. Police brutality flared, most infamously in the Danziger Bridge shooting, where officers killed 2 unarmed Black evacuees and wounded 4 more. It took years of litigation and federal prosecutions to bring accountability there. Katrina didn't just wash people out of their homes. It washed Black communities out of New Orleans' future. So, where are we 20 years later? The scars remain. They'll always be there. Entire neighborhoods like the Lower Ninth Ward are still dotted with empty lots where families never returned. Black home ownership rates in New Orleans are lower today than they were before Katrina. Charter schools replaced public schools. Public housing complexes were demolished and replaced with developments too expensive for many displaced residents to move back into. And the legal landscape? Still stacked against survivors. FEMA remains broadly immune. The Flood Control Act of 1928 still shields the Army Corps. HUD's settlement fixed one formula, but didn't change the deeper inequities baked into disaster recovery law. In other words, to keep it very simple here, the same legal loopholes that failed New Orleanians in 2005 are alive and well in 2025. And with stronger hurricanes, bigger floods, and deadlier wildfires hitting across the country, those same loopholes are poised to fail the next community too. Yeah, I need a break too. BRB, folks. Hey y'all, welcome back. And if there is one case here as we move into the case that changed everything, there's one that defined the legal aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. It's this one. Woof. In re Katrina Canal Breaches Litigation. And FYI, in re is a Latin phrase that simply means in the matter of or concerning. Add it to your knowledge bank, something that I have learned from law school. This case now, it asked a simple but seismic question. When the walls of New Orleans broke, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers admitted its levees were flawed, could survivors hold the government accountable in court? On the surface, it looks like the kind of lawsuit that could finally deliver justice. It seemed pretty straightforward. But instead, it revealed something quite chilling. When it comes to disasters, American law is built to protect the government before it protects the people. Now, in the days after the storm, as water swallowed homes and families crowded into attics and rooftops, people sitting on roofs waiting to be rescued, lawyers began drafting lawsuits. The target wasn't just insurance companies or FEMA. It was the Army Corps of Engineers. Why? Because the Corps had designed, built, and maintained the levees. And the evidence was damning. The Mississippi River Gulf Outlet, locals called it Mr. Go, was a navigation channel carved decades earlier that scientists and engineers had long warned would funnel storm surge directly into New Orleans. Reports dating back to the 1980s warned the Corps that Mr. Go was, quote, a hurricane highway into the city. And yet, nothing changed. So survivors, justifiably, went to court. They said this wasn't just a storm. This was outright negligence. And it was. In 2009, a federal district judge in Louisiana, Stanwood Duval, delivered a ruling that shocked the legal establishment. He found the Corps negligent in maintaining Mr. Go, and he didn't mince words, thankfully. Judge Duval wrote, "It is the court's opinion that the negligence by the Corps, in this instance, by failing to properly maintain Mr. Go, was not policy, but insouciance, myopia, and short-sightedness." Sidebar. Quick sidebar. Insouciance means carefree indifference or lighthearted nonchalance. Another one, thank you. Now that word, insouciance, hit like a thunderclap. The Corps hadn't been just negligent, the judge said. It had been indifferent, and that's even worse. For survivors, this was a rare moment of vindication. One St. Bernard Parish resident told reporters, "For the first time, someone in power said what we already knew. They let us down." The ruling opened the door for thousands of families to seek damages. It looked like, finally, the law might just hold the government accountable for what happened. But then came the appeal. And with it, the law that would slam the door shut. The Flood Control Act of 1928, which I briefly mentioned earlier. This statute was passed nearly a century earlier, my God, after the catastrophic Mississippi River floods of 1927. Lawmakers wanted the government to build massive flood control projects, levees, dams, canals, without the fear of being sued if those projects failed. So they gave the government broad immunity. When the Katrina cases reached the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2012, the judges acknowledged Judge Duvall's findings of negligence, but they said their acts and their hands were tied. The Flood Control Act's immunity shield completely applied to the situation, which I just don't understand how we will give these agencies broad immunity for thousands of lives lost, over a million people being displaced, and just say, well, you can't blame us, can't blame the government. That is wild. I really hope you understand that. The panel's opinion essentially boiled down to, yes, the Corps failed. Yes, it contributed to the destruction of entire communities. But under the law, survivors had no right to damages. And the Supreme Court, it refused to hear the case outright, leaving the Fifth Circuit's ruling intact, meaning they stood by what that court had already decided. For survivors, this was not just some loss in court. It was a second proverbial drowning. They had been let down by the levees. Then they had been let down by the law. One Lower Ninth Ward resident put it very bluntly during a town hall. Quote, "The Corps has immunity, but we didn't. We lost our houses, our history, our people. They lost nothing." Another survivor said, quote, "It felt like being told, your suffering doesn't matter. The government's mistakes don't count when it's you on the losing end." The legal wall was higher than the levees themselves. The Katrina Canal Breaches litigation wasn't about one storm or really one city. What happened here set the precedent for how disaster law works across the country. It affirmed that the federal government cannot be held liable for flood control failures, even when negligence, y'all, is proven. It showed that survivors of disasters face not just the wrath of nature, but also the near impossibility of winning in court. It left millions of Americans living behind levees, dams, and reservoirs with the knowledge that if those protections fail, they may be on their own. The broader implication was devastating. The law exists not to guarantee justice, but to guarantee the government doesn't get sued. And we've seen, unfortunately, echoes of this case ever since. When Hurricane Harvey hit Houston in 2017, lawsuits poured in against the Corps over flood reservoirs that swallowed entire neighborhoods. Judges once again cited immunity doctrines, narrowing survivors' path to recovery. When levees failed in the Midwest, or when wildfires raged in California and Hawaii, the same legal themes resurfaced: immunity, fine print, and courts reluctant to hold the government accountable. In fact, legal scholars have pointed out that the Katrina Canal Breaches is one of the defining disaster law precedents of our time, cementing the idea that acts of God and acts of negligence collapse into the same thing when the defendant is the government. For New Orleans, the case reinforced a really much deeper wound. Survivors had already been treated like criminals, labeled looters, subjected to curfews, brutalized by police. And that's whether or not the city would have gone through this disaster. They had already fought FEMA for trailers, HUD for grants, and insurance companies for claims. The court case was their last hope, and that someone would be held accountable. And when that collapsed, it's in a message that still echoes 20 years later. Justice was never really on their side. So where are we now? 2 decades after Katrina. The Flood Control Act is still law. The Fifth Circuit's ruling still stands. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers still manages thousands of miles of levees and flood projects across the country. The next time a levee breaks, and with climate change, we know there will be a next time, Katrina Canal Breaches will be waiting in the wings as precedent. For New Orleanians, this case isn't a dusty law school citation. It's the reason their city was declared a casualty zone with no remedy. It's the reason their losses were never repaid. It's the reason why many portions of New Orleans still remain depressed and boarded up. It's why the phrase, "never again," still rings very hollow. So here's the hard truth here. The levees failed, we know that. The law failed, we see that. And survivors were left to rebuild lives without accountability from the very government that failed them, the very government that was supposed to protect them and make them whole. The kicker? Survivors were hit with even more fine print. Insurance exclusions, FEMA eligibility barriers, and even police crackdowns on people just trying to survive. Oof. That's where we're about to head in more detail next in Exhibit Asterisk. Grab your magnifying glass and meet me right here after a quick break. Hey y'all, if segment 2 was about the courtroom, this one's about the kitchen table. The moment when families sat down after the storm, pulled out their insurance papers, their FEMA forms, their government letters, thinking, okay, at least help is coming, right? And instead found out the promises were written in big bold letters on top, but undone by the little asterisk at the bottom. Katrina didn't just destroy homes. It exposed how fine print can completely destroy lives. Let's take insurance, for instance. Thousands of homeowners thought they were covered. They paid their premiums for years, sometimes decades. Then the storm hit. Their houses filled with water. Totally unsalvageable. Roofs ripped off. Walls collapsed. And the insurance adjusters came in and said, sorry, that's not covered, babe. Why? Because most homeowners' policies excluded flood damage. Unless you bought special flood insurance completely separate to your standard homeowners insurance, which many families didn't have, you were out of luck. And it didn't matter if you lost everything. One survivor put it best, quote, I paid insurance for 20 years. But because water touched my floor, they told me it didn't count. They called it flood. I called it theft. Can't argue with her there. That's the fine print in action. You think you're buying peace of mind, but when disaster hits, you realize you were buying air. Hollow words. Okay, all right. Now, then came FEMA, okay? The agency that was supposed to be the safety net, right? But for many, it turned into a maze. Aid was slow, confusing, and full of rules that shut people out. Renters, for example, had far fewer options than homeowners. And in New Orleans, where the majority of Black families were renters, that meant whole communities were cut off from meaningful help. And when FEMA did provide housing, thousands of families were crammed into trailers, later found to be filled with toxic levels of formaldehyde. You can't make this up. Survivors went from breathing floodwater mold into breathing poison. FEMA provided poison. As one displaced mother told lawmakers, quote, "We lost our home to water, and then we lost our dignity to paperwork." And if you tried to fight FEMA's denial in court, immunity laws meant judges often shrugged and said, "Sorry, nothing we can do about it." That's the last thing you want to hear in the court of law. But maybe, just maybe, the cruelest fine print wasn't on paper. It was in how the law treated people just trying to survive. When food and water ran out, some survivors broke into grocery stores to get supplies. And here's where media bias truly showed itself. White survivors were described as finding food. Black survivors? Oh, baby, no, they're looting. You see how those two descriptions have two very different perceptions and meanings. Police enforced curfews. Some shot at evacuees. And then there was the Danziger Bridge shooting, where officers opened fire on unarmed Black evacuees, killing 2 and wounding 4. It took years of federal trials to hold anyone accountable. So while families were trying to make it out alive, literally, the system treated them not as citizens in need of rescue, but as criminals. So here's the common thread. Every so-called safety net had a trapdoor. Insurance companies promised coverage until they didn't. FEMA promised aid until the rules cut you out. The justice system promised protection, but delivered curfews and literally bullets. And every trapdoor swung hardest against the poor, the Black, the already vulnerable. Katrina didn't create those inequities at all. It amplified them. So 20 years later, insurance policies along the Gulf Coast still carry the same exclusions. FEMA aid still favors wealthier, whiter households, while watchdog reports show communities of color get less help slower. And policing in disaster zones still too often treats survival like a crime. The lesson of Katrina's fine print is painfully clear. The systems we think are there to protect us often vanish the moment you actually need them. Tell me how that is supposed to be justice. Let's take a quick break. We're going to come back and wrap up the show with objection, Your Honor. Welcome back, everyone. Let's get right into it, okay? Objection, Your Honor. Objection to the court of public opinion. I object to the story we've been told for 20 years. that New Orleans, quote, came back stronger. The hell? No, it didn't. That Katrina became a story of resilience. That somehow, because Bourbon Street is still packed on a Saturday night and tourists still line up for beignets at Café du Monde, the city is healed. No, that's not resilience. That's literally erasure. When officials celebrate resilience, what they're really doing is papering over the fact that thousands of Black families never came home. The lower Ninth Ward is still scarred with empty lots where homes once stood. Generational neighborhoods were bulldozed into playgrounds for developers. And 20 years later, the city is more expensive, more unequal, and less Black. That's not resilience. That's rebuilding on injustice. Here's the dirty little secret about resilience, y'all. It's become a buzzword politicians use when they don't want to talk about accountability. Flint's poisoned water? Oh, resilience. Katrina? Resilience. Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, where people died waiting for aid, and that Cheeto went down there and threw a roll of paper towels at them? Resilience. Maui wildfires in 2023. Oh, see also the Altadena wildfires of 2025, where entire communities burned while the state fumbled its response. Oh, that's resilience. Resilience is just the new thoughts and prayers. It's a way of telling survivors, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, bitch, because the law won't lift a finger. And it's not just Katrina, okay? In Flint, residents, mostly Black and poor, were told their water was safe when it was laced with lead. Years of lawsuits later, families are still fighting for justice, while officials skate by on technicalities and praise resilience. In Houston, Hurricane Harvey flooded neighborhoods in 2017. Lawsuits over flooded reservoirs ran smack into the same wall of government immunity we saw after Katrina. Families gutted their homes, rebuilt, and got nothing in court. In Puerto Rico, after Hurricane Maria, people died waiting weeks for FEMA to deliver aid. The same bureaucratic fine print that strangled Katrina survivors wrapped itself around the island. And in Maui, where fire consumed Lahaina, residents screamed that warnings failed, evacuations failed, and response failed. Sound familiar? Trend alert. Katrina all over again. Different disaster, same injustice. The pattern is as clear as the waterline marks that still stain New Orleans homes. Government fails in prevention. Government fails in response. Government shields itself in court. Communities of color and the poor pay the price. Meanwhile, officials stand in front of cameras and tell us to clap for resilience. One Katrina survivor said it best years ago. Quote, they let the walls fall on us, and then they told us it was nobody's fault. That's not resilience. That's betrayal. Legally, the message has been codified. Immunity for FEMA, immunity for the Army Corps, exclusions in insurance, inequities in aid. When the system is designed to deny justice before you even ask for it, that's not law. It's legalized abandonment. And it's not just New Orleans, which I know you know. Every American city sitting near a levee, a dam, or a floodplain is living under the same fine print. Every family drinking water from a neglected pipeline is one cost-cutting decision away from becoming Flint. Every coastal community staring down stronger hurricanes knows that Katrina's ghost is waiting for them in the courtroom. So here's my objection, Your Honor. I object to resilience as a weapon. I object to the lie that survival is a substitute for justice. I object to the government's hiding behind century-old immunity laws while communities present day drown, burn, and choke. Because resilience should not mean suffer silently. Resilience should not mean bury your dead and move on. And resilience should not mean you're on your own. 20 years after Katrina, we don't just remember the storm. We remember the failures, the levees that broke, the trailers that poisoned, the police that shot, the courts that slammed the door shut. And we see those failures again and again. In Flint, in Houston, in Puerto Rico, in Maui, in Altadena, the list goes on and on. The law is supposed to be a shield for the people. But when it comes to disasters, the shield has been very, very strategically flipped. It protects the powerful and leaves survivors exposed. So no, I don't celebrate resilience. I don't clap for survival when the storm was made worse by negligence and the recovery was sabotaged by American law. I object loudly, fiercely, and I'll keep objecting until accountability is more than a buzzword and justice is more than an empty promise. We can do better, America. Let's get to it. And with that, we close the case on Katrina at 20. But remember this, the next disaster is not a question of if, but when. And unless we rewrite the laws that failed in New Orleans, we'll keep rewriting the same story. Different places, same injustice. Justice delayed isn't just justice denied. In the face of disaster, it's lives denied, livelihoods denied. It's accountability denied. It's humanity denied. So when the next storm comes, and it will, remember Katrina. Remember these failures and demand better. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Overruled. I hope that this case study of the legalities behind a natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina imparted something on you or activated you in some way. Let me know. If you enjoyed today's episode, or even if you were mildly shook by something you heard, like that centuries-old law, here's how you can support the show. Tap and leave 5 stars wherever you listen. Please and thank you. Leave a review or about something you've taken away or have a comment on. Share this episode with your group chat. My fellow Louisianians, share this with the community. I would love to hear more stories about people who were impacted and how they were able to pick up the pieces and move on in the face of this very, very unfortunate government. But you know the energy. Share it with the people that you know can get something out of this. You got a legal oddity, a legal, very interesting law you want me to review, or something that you have encountered that you want me to just share with the class. Email me at overruledpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Overruled Podcast, and on YouTube at The Overruled Podcast. Seriously, like, share, or repost something nice, okay? We'll reply back. Stay informed, y'all. Stay fired up, and never, ever let them overrule you. Bye. Cut. It's afties. I have to take an Excel here just because doing this episode, while I was very happy to do it and to, get the information together to share with you all, it touches me. Just because of living it, right? While I did not live in New Orleans. I didn't live in Southern Louisiana. I'm from Northern Louisiana, Northwest Louisiana. And as it happened, watching it happen on the news, seeing it in real time, and then also, more importantly, living the evacuation of it all, like, it is something that's forever etched in my memory. There were, I mean, thousands upon thousands of people that basically migrated up to Northwest Louisiana. So you could obviously tell, like, oh, these are all people that have been displaced, between parts of Northwest Louisiana, parts of Eastern Texas, Southeastern Texas. I mean, it was just crazy to see and unfortunate to see how all these people had nowhere to go. And the only thing they had were the clothes on their backs. So doing this episode was touching for me, and I really, really hope that I did my fellow Louisianians proud with it. And yeah, I know I didn't cover every single thing. There's so much there, but I wanted to give everyone like a good, like, this is the trajectory of everything for over the last 20 years. And a lot of people think that, that's just something that happened and life moves on, right? But no, no, no. A lot of folks down in Louisiana, this completely shattered their life and has still done that 20 years later. Okay, so yeah, I had to do that Excel and I just did another one because I didn't get that out. Ooh, child. Welcome to Afties. I have my reliable cup with me. And I'm actually drinking another latte. You know what I'm saying? Because the lattes, tell me why. Okay, hold on. All right, let's level set for a second. So I was out recently, just, out running errands, just being cute out in the world. And I went to, I walked by a new coffee shop that looked real cute. Aesthetically, it was right. It smelled good. It was good vibes. So I walked in there and bitch, tell me why a latte, just a regular latte, was $7. I said, wait a minute. Hold it. Hold, please. And then they have the nerve. This is the real gaggy, like the fierce part of it is that in order to do like a milk substitute, say you are lactose intolerant, so you need like a almond milk, a oat milk, a hemp, whatever, bitch, it's a dollar surcharge to change the milk. And oh no, 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 there's more. Let's say you're like, I just want like something simple, like I want an iced vanilla latte. That is not groundbreaking at all. Bitch, it is 75 cents for flavor add-ins. So you've just taken a $7 base with regular milk latte, hot or iced, thankfully, added an extra $1.75 in customizations for a milk substitute and a flavor. So your $7 latte has now turned into $8.75. Bitch, you got me up. And that's the reason why I make my lattes at home more often than not now. Because I'm not paying, that's damn near $10. Because you also know that they're going to do the little transaction, and on the screen it's going to be like add gratuity 15, 20, 25% or other. So then by the time that you give a tip to the baristas in them at the damn coffee shop, you have spent $10. And that's just on a drink. Let's not add in here the fact that, let's say you want a pastry, which I love a good little cookie, a little scone, a little with my coffee. That's another $5, $6, $7. You have left the coffee shop spending damn near $20 for a latte and a scone. Bitch. And y'all want to say inflation isn't real? Baby, it is wild. So that was all of, that's me just saying that's why I make my at home. Okay. My Americanos, my lattes. I would love to know, and this is Los Angeles. So prices. So I'm curious to know, like, what is the price of a good latte where you at? Like, if I just want an iced latte with oat milk or almond milk, and maybe, not always, maybe add vanilla to it. How much is that gonna run me? I feel like it's gonna be less than $10 with tip. I feel it'll probably be more like 6, 7, but I could be wrong. So let me know because I am curious. Anyway, moving on from that. Um, life has been busy, 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 busy. We are fast approaching like not even midterm season. It's like law school. Oh, girl, and I say this lovingly because I signed up for this. So miss me with any sort of antagonistic, okay? But we're approaching this season where it's like you've gone over all the material, right? And then they give you like weeks to prepare, or a few weeks to prepare for finals at the end of the semester. And so it's like this, like an incubation period. And I've never experienced that in any of my degrees. So I'm like, this is fascinating. I don't know what this means. It makes me a little nervous because it's like, you're giving me all this time for this material. What is this final going to look like? You know what I'm saying? But trust me, we got it. We going to do this. And yeah, law school's going as law school as one would expect law school to go, right? So aside from that, work, um, oh my God, I'm gonna save that story for another afties because it hasn't fully resolved yet. But I have a car, oh, I have a car story to share with y'all. Like taking my car in to be serviced. Oh my God, I have a story about that that I'll dive into in another afties. But anyway, I hope y'all doing good out there. I hope that you are ooh, I hope that you're able to figure out what it is that you want to get done for yourself right now in this America we're in. Cause is crazy. It's kukarach. Okay. And I want everyone listening to make sure they have a plan. That's all I can say. Like, have a plan. Because when goes left, you never want to be that girl that's just like, oh, I'm just out here. I guess I'm no, you don't want to be so I just realized how that sounded out loud. You don't want to be by the government. That's what I mean. Okay. There you go. And that's all I got. You probably noticed that there is a little difference here in the makeup. That's because I gave my office a more I gave my office like not a full, it was like a partial refresh. And so I got this very large like it's a dinner table, truly. But it's beautiful and it functions just like a desk for me. So then I can have like I have my work stuff, on the other side of the table, have my law books and all this my calendar on the table. It makes you feel more adult. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you get it. You get it. So the refresh is here, and we also only have one camera because I was like, listen, look, I love y'all. Y'all great, not in a weird way, but I all that back and forth. I'm doing all of it by myself. So until I reach the point where I got people doing that for me, we gonna do one camera because then you just get to focus on the face, the the front face. You know what I'm saying? Okay, now I'm just being silly, and it's probably because I'm a little bit delirious. All right, y'all. I love y'all. Thank y'all so much for listening. Thank you for the support. Please share me with your friends, family, whomever you feel really could get some value out of what we do over here at the Overruled podcast. And I am going to talk to y'all. Yeah, I'm going to talk to y'all, and you will. You know what? Never mind. I'm gonna see y'all later. That doesn't make no. It doesn't make sense. Okay. Love you, not in a weird way. Love me back, not in a weird way. And we'll do all of this all again sometime soon. All right. Bye.